Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of MacGyver's Workshop. Today we're going to be diagnosing a no-start condition on a 2002 Ford F-250 Super Duty with a 7.3 liter Powerstroke diesel engine in it. So we'll go through all the normal steps to determine why the engine's actually not starting, and let's get started. Okay, so for starters, a couple of very good tools to have if you're going to diagnose a no-start condition, especially on one of these newer diesels. Number one is a clamp-on amp meter, so you can measure your current draw to see if the glow plugs are working. And two is a good scan tool. You can probably get away with just a regular flat code reader, but the better scan tool you can have, the better your abilities will be to diagnose an issue. So I like this one. At the time I bought it, of course, fairly cheap now. It's a couple of years old, but it was the best balance between just your standard auto parts store code reader and like a snap-on tool, which was like zillions of dollars and thousands of dollars in upgrades every year and all that. So this one works out really well for me. So alright, let's get on out there and see what we can find. Of course, one of the first things you want to do is to make sure you got two good strong batteries, and because you have to spin these motors over at least 100 RPM. I'll apologize for the wind noise here, but we're outside, obviously, and the wind's kicking up a bit. Then, if you have that clamp-on current meter, clamp it on right there on the rearward of the two solenoids. The front one runs the air intake preheater. We're not really interested in that as far as getting the motor started, but the rear one, the rear relay or solenoid, is what works the glow plugs. Okay, now when I turn the key on, we're going to watch to see what kind of amps we're pulling here. If all our glow plugs are working, we should be pulling quite a lot of amperage. Yeah, like 100 and some odd amps there. So we know our glow plugs are working. Okay, another thing we want to watch for is activity on the tachometer, and that will tell us that our cam position sensor is good. Now you may not see it right away, but you should see the tach start moving after you start cranking it. Alright, there you go, 7.3 liter, direct injection, 2002. And yes, I already know that this is the VIN. You can do the auto scan, but I've already done it, so in the interest of brevity here, and we'll go straight to the powertrain control module. Now, one of the things these are notorious for is the valve cover gaskets have the wiring harness in them for all the injectors. So if you have a good scan tool, then you can do a buzz test on the injectors And as long as you hear 8 buzzes, you know that you're good. I'm going to roll this window down. It's getting hot in this truck here. Now here is where you want to do the injector self-test. I can do a glow plug test too, but I always like using my amp meter. Nothing like a good direct reading there. So we'll do this, and we'll go yes, and then you're going to hear a bunch of buzzes and clicks, and we want to hear them. We want to hear for 8 different cylinders. That tells us that there's a good electrical continuity to each injector. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's good. We've got electrical continuity to all 8 injectors. And this will tell us system pass, no codes detected. So that's good. Forgive me for shaking the camera around here, but so these things running like an ARM processor, so they're kind of slow, so it's reading up a lot of stuff from the computer. Okay, so we're going to read the codes, and we're just going to retrieve the continuous memory diagnostic trouble codes. And looky there. Injector control pressure lower than desired, engine crank or run. Injector control pressure higher, lower than desired, engine running. Now, what that tells me is that we have IPR valve, or the injector pressure regulator, has kind of taken a dump on us. So now we know what we got to fix. Okay, so this down there with that wiring harness, if I can get to it and point to it properly here, that connector right there is the electrical connector, and right below it there, that's the injector pressure regulator. And it's right down here kind of below the fuel filter bowl on top of the engine. And it's a bit of a bear to get to, but that's okay. This isn't the worst job I've had. And of course, one of the other troubleshooting or diagnostic steps you want to take too is make sure you've actually got fuel in the bowl here, so you're not like have a bad lift pump or something. But we've already confirmed that on this motor. So anyhow, moving right along. All right. So from a particularly Irish sounding named website that sells auto parts, you can see that the injector pressure regulator valve itself is rather pricey at $389.99 here. So, but the cool thing about it is unless it electrically fails or the valve just gets completely galled up, you can get by with resealing it, because it has a metal pintle in it with a rubber O-ring on it, and those are the only parts in it that need to be fixed or cleaned or replaced. And the kit for that is available from the Ford dealer, and it's called an IPR seal kit, and it runs about $60 by the time you're done paying sales tax. But most dealers will probably have to order it, so don't think you're going to be lucky and get to fix it when you find out that it's broke on a Saturday. So, all right, so let's get back out to the workshop. Okay, so this is the kit. There's the part number if you need to write it down. I know that this works on all the 7.3s. Not familiar enough with the 6 liter, so I can't tell you there, but This is the same part number when I had to fix my 95, and this is a 2002, which is second generation. So let's pop this thing open and I'll show you how little you get for your $60. Of everything in this kit, these little tiny O-rings, little tiny O-rings are what's most important, and one of them will get a nick on it, and that's all it takes to prevent that truck from starting. So it won't build up enough pressure to the injectors, and without that it won't start. So okay, first thing you need to do is we need to disconnect that electrical connector down there, and it has a little metal bail on it that you pull back and then the connector will slide right off. I'm going to try and do this and hold the camera at the same time. There. Yeah. Maybe you can see how the wire bail is pulled back, and then we'll just pull the connector out of the harness there, and she's out. Now we have to get that puppy out of there. That's the fun part, and it's going to make a mess too. Just fair warning, because this whole thing here is a reservoir of oil, and you're going to leak some out. So you're going to have a leak. So if you got a pretty driveway, better hope it breaks down somewhere else. Okay, so the IPR valve comes off actually in two pieces. You got the solenoid winding, which wraps around the outside, and then you have the central portion, which is the valve. Now normally they would recommend that you pull this fuel bowl and get it all out of the way. We're not going to have the luxury of doing that here because of the proximity and all of where this thing's broken down. So we're just going to have to do it kind of quick and dirty and clean the mess up after the fact. So what we're going to go do is go for that little tiny stamped metal nut right here and get that off first, and then that whole solenoid assembly will slide off, as you'll see here in a second. So what we'll need to do is get a 3/4 inch socket on that and break that loose. Once you get it pretty much loose, then you can spin it off with your fingers. And the other part's going to require an 1 1/8" socket. So let's get that nut out of there. And then we got to take the little spacer off, and then we can slide the solenoid coil off of there. We got the nut. Now let's get the spacer. Ideally you don't want to drop any of this stuff down in there if you can help it. There's the spacer, and then we're going to slide that solenoid coil off of there. And there she is. We'll clean all that up too when we get going. Now what's left down there is the actual IPR valve itself, and it takes a deep 1 1/8" socket to get that out of there. So unfortunately I'm not going to be able to hold the camera and do this at the same time, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. Alright, so this is what the injector pressure regulator valve looks like. And there's a little sliding valve in there that bleeds off pressure, and we have an O-ring here and an O-ring here, and we're going to clean this all up and get a better look at it. Okay, so these are the three rings that were taken off of the old IPR. There's a scarf cut Teflon ring and a rubber O-ring that go here, and then the big O-ring goes back here. And then this is all what comes in the kit. One other thing you want to do is to check the actual pressure regulator valve itself. And for that you use a pick and you go right in the center here. And make sure that that valve is moving freely. It's spring loaded, so we'll make sure you don't have one that got stuck on you. This one of course is in good shape, so we're alright. Okay, this is the way you want your rings to go on there. The scarf cut ring goes closest to the threads, and then the O-ring seal. If both of those are not in that groove like that, then this valve is not going to work like it's supposed to. And you want to be very gentle when you put this thing in, because that's a very stiff rubber O-ring, and that Teflon scarf cut ring is very delicate. So you don't want to spread it too much to get it on there, just enough to kind of roll it on in there and spread that ring as little as possible. And then we need to lube it up with a little bit of oil, like so, and a little bit along the base here. And then we go thread it back in. Well, it's rapidly getting dark, and I've got it back in there. Now let's see if she'll start up. Okay, pardon the shaky camera action here, but the one other thing you want to look at on these that may cause you a no start condition is the ICP sensor, or the injector control pressure sensor. If there's oil down in there, which this one has, then you want to go ahead and replace it. Now, technically, supposedly, you can just unplug the sensor and the PCM will plug in default values. It ain't going to run great, but it'll get you home. But that ain't going to do you no good if it's puking oil. So this one's seeping a bit. It's still reading, but we're going to go ahead and change that while we're in here. Okay, so the original factory sensor in this case came off, looks like this, and the new one looks a little different. Much better design, I think, because you can get a socket on there. The original one came off with a 5/8 wrench, and this goes on with like 1 1/16 or 1 1/8 socket. So let's get that puppy back down in there, get her buttoned up. Okay, now I'm kind of under the truck here. I'm going to go ahead and replace the camshaft position sensor, because despite the fact that the scan tool is telling me that the cam sensor is good, I'm not seeing any movement on the tach when I crank it. So since I haven't changed this since the motor was built a long time ago, I'm going to go ahead and replace it, just for good measure. And you always, 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 and forever use a dealer part on this. I don't always advocate going to the dealer, but when it comes to camshaft sensors on a Powerstroke and filters and things like that, always go with the dealer part, because your AutoZone and O'Reilly parts and all that, I've just never had any luck with them. So, and I like O'Reilly's, so I think it's just more of an aftermarket supplier thing. So anyway, let's get it out of there. It's just a 10mm bolt that holds it in there. And then it's got a little O-ring and a bracket on there. So let's get her out. Okay, so thus far we've gone ahead and rebuilt the injector pressure regulator valve. And basically it's just a couple O-rings and a scarf cut Teflon seal. Then we also noticed that the injector control pressure sensor up on the front of the driver's side head, that's what tells the computer what the actual pressure is. It's like an oil pressure gauge basically. We found that was leaking, but what the real clue was, you know, I thought that was our smoking gun when the IPR didn't look as bad as I thought it should. You know, the O-ring was hard. It didn't hurt to repair it for the $50 the kit cost, but or rebuild it. But you know, what really became the final clue for me was when the truck didn't start when the injector control pressure sensor was disconnected. I can see if it leaks and you have the sensor connected, then it'll read low and then it won't be enough to allow the truck to start. But if it's completely disconnected, the PCM is supposed to plug in a default value to allow the truck to start. It won't run great, but it'll get you home. And of course throw a check engine light. But the truck still didn't start. And I hardly believe that the high pressure oil pump was bad, because you know, the truck had been running wonderfully prior to this. But the other clue was that the tack didn't move when I cranked the truck. Now, I don't put a whole lot of credence in there. I've read on the forums where everybody says do this tack test or whatever, but I've never seen one where to have the tack bounce when you crank it over, because you're not going to see 150 RPM on that tack, because the distance between the first and the zero and the first notch is you know, is 250 RPM. So in theory you should see something, but you know, I've got a perfectly good running truck now after I changed the cam sensor. Okay. Alright, and that tack never moved while the engine was cranking. So, you know, it was the camshaft position sensor. But to show you how wonky these things are, the scan tool was telling me that the camshaft position sensor was good and it was outputting a signal. Apparently it wasn't a good enough signal to the computer, because like I said, once we changed that camshaft position sensor, oops, guess I ought to let the glow plugs warm up, huh? Yeah, she fires right up. I still have to bleed it too, obviously, because I've taken the IPR out. This is only the third time it's been started since I installed that IPR, so it's probably going to have to bleed out a little bit. So, but anyway, there you have it. Those three items are pretty much, if you have a no-start condition in an otherwise good truck, and what I mean is, you know, first or second gen 7.3, and it's going to be usually one of those three things. It's either going to be the camshaft position sensor, or the injector pressure regulator valve, or the injector control pressure sensor. And if those three items don't fix it, then and you're gonna get into some money. So, you know, my philosophy is if none of them have been replaced in a very long time, like within 100,000 miles on this motor, I'm gonna replace all three of them just to be safe, because My friend and his wife haul horses and drive long distances with this truck, and they don't need to be left on the side of the road. So anyhow, thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Please subscribe. And the next thing we're going to be doing is the fan clutch and the thermostat. So see you next time.